How can we put an end to sexual exploitation? This is the Leaders of Transformation podcast. And on this show, we interview difference makers and world changers who are disrupting for good. I'm your host, Nicole Jansen, and our guests today are Danielle Strickland and Guy Chevreau. And Danielle is actually the co-founder of Brave Global, an organization that reaches vulnerable girls and provides a message of hope and empowerment, specifically girls that have been exploited. Guy recently wrote a book called Brave in Real Life, which shares the real life stories of these women and also the catalyst for their hope and their healing and the transformation that occurs, and how they're now, many of them are actually going out and helping others to experience healing and restoration as well. So I'm really excited for the conversation that we're going to have here. If you're listening live, to let us know where you're dialing in from. Oh, that ages me, but where you're tuning in from. And if you have questions along the way, post them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear where you're dialing in from, as I said, but also, what perhaps even like if you have a heart for this area, if there's something that we can share, we can talk about that can specifically speak to the situation that you're experiencing right now, please let us know that as well. And we'll get to it during our conversation. All right, so let's bring our guests on. Danielle, Guy, welcome to the Leaders of Transformation. We're glad you're here today.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
So let's talk about how you two actually met each other and why this topic is so important to both of you.
Danielle and I first met in 2014, I think. We were both speakers at a summer conference in England, and I was there with my wife. Danielle held us absolutely spellbound as she talked about her work in human trafficking and the work to end the slavery. The story after story, we were blown away. And we were both together in the speaker's tent at a break, and I forget who came to whom, but Danielle and her husband Stephen had previously read my fourth book, among maybe a couple of others, We Dance Because We Cannot Fly. I'd lived with recovering heroin addicts for about 3 months, and it's their story from the bottoms of addiction through to their full recovery. So we had lots and lots to talk about. It was then a couple years later, we'd moved back to Canada, as had the Stricklands, and we got together for supper. And it was then that Danielle started telling stories about Brave, and that blew us away again.
Awesome. Well, so let's talk about Brave, Danielle. Maybe share how you came to launch this organization. Why is it so important to you? Mm-hmm. There's many things that you could have done in your life to make a difference. Why this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I spent over 20 years of my life working with women, trying to get them out of sexual exploitation and stop human trafficking, and I think it's a worthy pursuit for an entire life, actually. But I really struggled with the reality of that, the hardness of that, the difficulty of that. And I was actually visiting Madame in a brothel, in the back of a brothel in Edmonton, Canada, a massage parlor that really operates as a brothel. And I was saying to her, I remember saying that you're one of the strongest, talented women I've ever met. What are you doing this with your life? Like, why are you doing this? And she was one of the, really strong, like a facade of strength. And she took me in the back room so no one would hear, shut the door. And she told me the story of when she was 11, raped by her dad for the last time. And she was running away from home. She was walking up the street that the brothel was on. And she said a truck pulled over and a guy said he would give me a place to stay for the night if I had sex with him. And I turned my first trick, and she said, I cried the whole night. I cried the whole next night. I cried the whole next night. And she said to me, when I got done crying, I decided I'd do the best with what I'd been given. And then she looked at me, first sign of weakness I'd ever seen in her, just eyes filled with tears. And she said to me, where were you when I was 11? And that question, what was so powerful about that question? It was amplified in my spirit. I felt like God was asking me, where were you when she was 11? But the other thing that happened to me was every story I had ever heard over 20 years of working with women sounded exactly the same. So it wasn't the specialty of the story, it was the familiarness of the story. And I really started to think there has got to be a way to get there first. And when I moved shortly after that, I moved to Los Angeles and ran into Noemi Chavez, who's the other co-founder of Brave. And locally, she was hearing the same exact thing. Their church was helping women out of exploitation. They kept hearing the same stories. And we came across a study that said in America, 75 to 80% of all human trafficking, domestic sex trafficking victims in America come from foster care. And we kind of had this like realization that went like this. We know their names. Like we know where they are. We know where they're from. Each of these girls has a case file. So there's a way to reach them. And Noemi had started a local outreach event to girls at risk of trafficking. And I went to it and said, wow, this is a recipe that we have got to share, some good news that we could get there first.
Wow. Well, I'm glad you shared those statistics. I was going to ask you to do that because I think it's so telling and shocking at the same time. Like you said, we if you pay attention and you ask the questions, you get to some answers that can actually lead to a potential solution. Key in your book, Brave in Real Life, you talk about you share the stories. I mean, you interviewed these women, many of these stories, and so many of them. I loved how you shared different aspects and different stories, but there was a commonality to all of the stories, just like Danielle, you were just talking about. And so, tell us a little bit about what it was like to interview these women, and also from a perspective of being a man. I know you're also a pastor and so forth, but interviewing these women and having them share their stories on a very real and raw level. What was that like?
First and foremost, just such an incredible privilege. I had never met any of the 9 women that I interviewed. Danielle, Noemi, a few others in the Brave organization had contacted these women. They had relationship with them, they know them well, and asked if they would be willing to participate in being interviewed, being part of the book. And because these women so trusted Danielle and Noemi and Miley and others, they said yes, and I inherited that trust. I got to do what I got to do because of the confidence and the trust that these women had in Danielle and the others. The interviews typically went about 2 hours. Very, very quickly, after the briefest of introductions, these remarkable women just began opening up their lives. I learned the interviewing skill doing that book, We Dance Because We Cannot Fly, interviewing the recovering heroin addicts. There's quite an art to asking the leading questions without, as it were, cooking the book. Open-ended questions, clarifying questions to help somebody with their story. And then I'd have to re-interview once I'd transcribed the interview for greater clarification. And a remarkable privilege to be allowed in to the greatest trauma these women have ever faced. Every single one of them broke down in tears at some point during the interview. The trauma is still so very real for them. That said, there was also a lot of laughter in the course of the interviews. And the sense that once I was able to transcribe the story, fill in some of the gaps with further interviews, put it into a cohesive narrative, that in itself, I think, brought a measure of healing to these women, to see their life story with some ordered consequence to it, rather than just chaos and trauma. Yeah, it was a deeply, profoundly moving experience to interview these women.
Yeah, I can imagine. Actually, Harmony Grillo, who you interviewed, she's been on this show, actually, Small World.
Mm-hmm.
She was on a few years ago. I heard her testimony, a short piece of it, at a church in Glendale, California, at Expression 58. And such a powerful communicator, and so inspired by her story. And she's got her book, Scars and Stilettos, I think it's called. And yeah, so she came on and started to share about, of course, their ministry. And that's what's so encouraging, is that it's not just that you shared the stories of their trauma, but you shared the stories also of the transformation that happened, the healing. And it's a process. Some of them were, by the time you interviewed them, further along the process maybe than others, but there was this message of hope, this message of empowerment, that they were on the other side, on the upside, if you will, and creating opportunities like Harmony, for example, who's now created a ministry that's a global ministry and has all these amazing things that they're doing. I Am a Treasure is the name of that ministry. And so they go and rescue women from sex trafficking. And Harmony, for those of you that, I would recommend those of you listening to go back and find that episode. But she was a stripper, and found herself in that situation, and was able to get out of that, and now helps other women to do the same. So very, very powerful. Now, Danielle, I would love for you to share. I'd love for you to share about some of the things that we can do, because you're also about like, okay, so how do we protect these girls from getting into this position at all? How do they need to be educated? Like, how can we educate our young girls? How do parents, support their girls? Because I hear, like you said, foster care is one of the very commonalities, from all of these girls, that was 75% were in foster care, but some of them were just in unhappy homes and so forth. And so, yeah, just talk about what we can do.
Yeah, there's some vulnerabilities, that have been exposed. And actually, one of the reasons we chose the women that we chose were, one, relationship resiliency. We were on a journey with them. They're committed to their healing. They've done a lot of work to get where they are today. And then, definitely Treasures is one of the organizations led by Harmony, who is amazing and a great friend of Brave. Also, Rahab's Daughter is another organization that Sam leads, and she was started at the front desk of a brothel as well. So, these are women that are involved, and, they lead their own nonprofits, but there's something powerful about hearing the stories from the source. And that really is, we're trying to platform women's voices. This is one of the great things I love about Guy using his gift as a man to actually platform the voices of women. We need a lot more people involved to use their gifts to actually support the empowerment of women and girls. And like we said, Noemi and I, we keep saying this over and over again. So one of Brave's kind of motto is, girls are not the problem. They're the solution to the problem. And really, if we can get this message of empowerment, so there's kind of two things about this book. And I would say everyone should just read the book, because you need to be aware there's narratives that go on all the time that are false narratives. And if you want to know the truth about how trafficking happens, about how this can happen in somebody's life, whether they were raised in a suburb or whether they were raised in foster care or whether they entered as a strong, seemingly empowered woman in the sex industry or whatever it is, these are all these different perspectives of how trafficking happens. So you're learning from the source how this happens in real life and how it's such a prevalent thing that's happening in every community across the world. So it's meant to be an awakening agent. It's meant to expose some things. It's meant to platform the voice of survivors, which is one of the key things that Brave Global does is we gather vulnerable girls and communities, we mobilize churches. So what would happen is if you're part of a church or a community and you say, I want to be involved in Brave, what I discovered working with women who've been sexually exploited, trying to get people involved, was it was a really highly complex problem. There was a lot of training, professionals were required, safe how, there are all this sort of infrastructure and money needed to make this a good work. I still think that's really important to do. But Brave is at the entry level. This is for anybody that might want to make a difference. And we just start by coaching a church or a community to say, where are the vulnerable girls in your community? Who else is working in this space? And how can the church offer what it has to empower them, to give them solutions, to help them understand what trafficking is, how it happens, and what they can do to fight against it themselves. And so this has just been such a powerful tool for the church to actually be part of the fight. So not like taking it on as its own, like we're the only thing but actually joining with people who are doing the work already, saying we want to be partners in this work and we want to be part of the solution. And the solution are the girls themselves. And so a survivor will come to an event that a church will put on and tell the story. So the first Brave I actually ever went to was the local one in Long Beach, and Harmony was the speaker, believe it or not. And I remember her with a room full of, there's probably at that time, about 400 girls. Now I think at that event, there's like 1,500 girls. But at that event, there's about 400 girls. They're all like girls in the system in some way at this Brave event in Long Beach. Now, I should say that the Brave girls, all girls are at risk of being sexually exploited, all girls. So if this was like a bullseye, like a target, the bullseye would be the most vulnerable girls, which would be girls within the system, the social system. But then if you actually, the next stream out would be girls with sexual abuse in their history, which we know is about 1 in 3 girls, or any kind of parental breakdown, of a support system. That would be another, that's a high percentage of girls. And then if you just widen out that that target, you'll understand that all girls are at risk of being sexually exploited. So this is not just for one specific girl, but we do try to keep the bullseye in our mind, the most vulnerable girls. So I remember walking into this event and Harmony saying, okay, I'm going to give you some advice. Like, how can you fight against this so that you don't end up having to go through what I went through? She told a little bit of her story. And then I just watched these 400 girls in the system take out their notebooks, flip it open, take out their pens. There was silence in the hall. I mean, I don't know if anyone has experience with 400 girls in a room, but I've never seen anything like this before. And she said, here's number 1, get help now. Get help now. And all these girls wrote, get help now. She said, number 2, sexual abuse happens in almost all of our lives. I would imagine that almost everyone here has been sexually abused. That will not go away unless you address it now. So number 3, I want you to write down this helpline. Number 4, it was just like so, and I just was sitting there going like, what's happening right now? These 400 girls are writing down like a top 10 list of what they can do right now to do the work, to combat, to heal, to not go into this pipeline of trafficking. And I knew then when I walked into that event that this was like a key. It was a recipe that every church could use to actually help girls stop being trafficked.
Well, I think it's one thing for somebody to say, I want to help you and, I don't want this to happen to you. And it's another thing for somebody who's actually been there to say, and there was, I forget all the names in the book, but, some of the girls actually started when they got out, they started working with law enforcement in giving them, like showing them where it happens and what to look for, and even like health practitioners, how do they recognize that if there's a girl coming in to the hospital with a boyfriend, and the boyfriend says she fell and she's got these strange bruises and all this stuff. Is what do they recognize so that they're not going to let that girl go, And so I thought that was really, really powerful. But that's where
Yeah.
it's so wonderful when they hear those stories from someone who can experience, who understands them, and who better to help someone through a situation like that than somebody who's actually been through and says, I get it, I've been there. So it's really powerful. Yeah. Can you
Well,
want to say something?
that very story, Tangelia came with the bruises, on and on. She had a spiral fracture to her arm because her boyfriend had twisted it behind her back so hard. But he wouldn't let her talk to the doctor. He was answering all the questions. She fell, she fell, she fell. And Tangelia is just looking at the doctor going, can't you see what's happening here? And the doctor didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And she said, if that doctor had said, I need to take you for x-rays, chump, you need to stay here for a moment, and had a word with her, her life could have been so different.
Yeah.
So yeah, she does a lot of work with the medical profession to help show and explain, ask the questions when a woman comes in heavily made up over bruises and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, and
but again, this
yeah.
is one of the things that Tanis is one of the voices in the book, and she used to come with me to a lot of Braves and share her story. And she would say, I would say to her afterwards, like, if you were 11 or 12 years old and you went to this event, would it have made any difference in your life? And she would say to me, Danielle, it would have changed my life. Like, I didn't even know this happened to other girls. Like, I didn't know. I thought it was just happening to me. I had no idea this was like a thing that was happening. I had no idea where to go for help or even how to say I needed it. Like, she's like, just all of the things that you're doing would have changed the trajectory of my life at 12. And that's why she really committed her life to be a brave ambassador. And I think that's why all of these. So yes, the work of the professionals, yes, and awareness, yes, and like safe houses, yes, and like go into sex clubs and spread the word, yes, all of those things, yes. But guys, if I could trade everything that I've done, all the years of my ministry, for one moment to get to a 12-year-old girl before she gets in the car, like, or at a party, like I was at a Brave in California. It was at Mariners Church, Leeds Braves. And there was a woman there. We always have a self-defense portion of Brave. Is they come in and they do like self-defense, basic self-defense. And the woman that came in was an MMA fighter named Kelly. She came in and she said, the first time I'm ever sharing this publicly because it's a Brave event. And she shared about how she was sexually abused when she was 10 years old. And it wasn't until she said she never spoke of it till she was like 19. When she was 19 years old, she was doing martial arts training. And her self-defense instructor told her that the first line of self-defense is not physical, it's verbal. The first line of self-defense is always verbal. So they'll teach you this if you go to self-defense, like yell, make a lot of noise, like speak up for yourself, like say these phrases. And she realized that her line of defense in the sexual abuse, that idea of like covering everything and silent and you can't tell anyone and secrecy is one of the great ways that this thing keeps perpetuating. So I remember sitting there's about 1,000 girls at that event. And I remember her saying, I want you to repeat after me. Stop touching me. And like this whole group of girls is like, stop touching me. I'm uncomfortable in this situation. I'm uncomfortable in this. And she just started giving girls phrases to say when they're at a party or they're seeing somebody else and happening to somebody else, and like ways to communicate what has happened to them and who they can talk to. And I mean, and again, she just said, if I had been to this event, and she wasn't trafficked, but she had just been sexually abused and then like had suffered through the silence of this for years. And she said, if I had heard this and phrases to say and ways to say it and where to get help and that I wasn't alone, we have every girl look around and say, you're in a great company. Like there are more of you than you think. And if we could work together collaboratively, wow, we could really help each other. And so part of the strategy of Brave is creating Brave circles of support, where it's basically like support groups in these places. And this is entry level. This is stuff that any church can actually do. Any person can do. Any volunteer can create capacity for girls to hear that they're not the problem, they're the solution.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I would love to have you come down to Southern California, and well, you're in Toronto. I know you get around, as you said, and you're in LA, but coming down to North County, San Diego, and doing that. So we'll need to talk about setting something like that up. I love when you said about the it starts with our verbal, what we say,
Yeah.
um, because in the Bible it actually talks about, life and death is in the power of our tongue, right?
Mhm.
And we speak things into existence, and sometimes it's actually the lack thereof, the silence, right? That actually is what entraps us, is the silence, the fear of not saying anything. And it's interesting that you say that, because when I was reading in the stories, all these women who they didn't really have anybody to talk to, and even if they did or they asked, there was one story where she was saying, "What do you think about?" Should I strip to make some extra money? And her teacher had said, "Well, I think it's fine." And then of course he turned out that he was a customer at that strip joint
Mhm.
later. But
Right.
but having people, and I think it's so important when we talk about community, it just it emphasizes how important it is who we associate with, and surrounding these girls and letting them know that they're not alone, and
Mhm.
that there is a community. So Brave sounds amazing that you create that for them, and you create safe spaces for them to learn and to share their stories. So that is so powerful. Have you had any, I think about the men and women who have perpetrated these crimes, and there's eliminating the supply, if you will, reducing the supply. Girls can protect themselves. Then there's the other side of this, is people that, like you mentioned about that madam, who she got into this and didn't, just because was her experience. What is your experience with helping them, or organizations that you know of that can help them to break free of this pattern, whether a pimp or a John, or like somebody that has been in on that side of it,
Mhm.
and is now realizing, as I've heard stories of them, that sometimes that they have now gone on, realized what they had done, and now are not on the other
Mhm.
side of it, helping to bring healing.
Well, that's part of the strategy of Brave in Real Life, the book as well, is
Mm-hmm.
that the actual real life stories of women are the means by which we break, the uh, the the objectification of women that allows exploitation to happen. So, for example, one of the most successful programs that have ever been created in terms of stopping men from exploiting women is called the John School. And these are in many places around the world. But the John School is a diversion program from the court. So a guy might get caught buying sex, and he'll get a ticket, a fine, whatever. And in order to avoid the courts, he's offered this opportunity to go to what they call John School. This was created by a woman advocate, and they hear from all kinds of people how bad this is for the community. But then the highlight of the school is when a formerly sexually exploited woman comes and shares her real story, what she really felt, what was really going on for her, what she really, like, on the inside was feeling, and how she was trapped. And that school has a 97% non-reoffense rate. It is one
Wow.
of the most effective strategies to stop men from buying sex, because what you've done is you've given a real face. You've made a real human. You've heard, you can't objectify somebody anymore. If you can't objectify them, you can't buy them. I mean, literally, that's how, oppression works, is it's the other. They like it. They want it. I'm helping them. This is just and then as soon as they hear the truth, they're like, and I think that's, part of that revelation, we overcome the enemy by what Jesus has done, and then by the word of our testimony. The truth is so powerful to break the back of the lie. So that's one of the strategies. We'd love for men everywhere to read Brave in Real Life. I think there's so many things that men can do, and even just to have Guy use his gifts to serve this is a good example of a man using his capacity and his power to serve truth, right? To serve truth and to let truth break the back of some of these lies. So I know there are organizations that specialize in this, and the John School is a wonderful strategy that's traveling around, and I'd love to see more of them. And demand is actually the problem. If men stop buying sex, the human trafficking would end. It's just that simple. We could probably end it tomorrow. So, guys, if enough of them are listening right now, just stop buying sex and we're done. But in the meantime, these girls need to know, and they need to know, even if it's not sexual exploitation, even if it's just sexual abuse, even if it's just patterns of oppression, they need to know that they don't have to submit to those anymore, that there's a way out. And that's what, that's really Brave's specialty.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love what you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for that. That's all I can say about that. One last thing before we wrap up, because there's a lot of organizations out there that that serve and support and try to end human trafficking around the world. But there's a way that you're doing it, and it's because you're both believers. That this book it speaks to that. It speaks to a relationship with God. And so I wanted to share, and either one of you, Guy or Danielle, whoever feels called to answer this, is why is it so important to introduce them to God in this process, rather than just saying, let's help you to stop, right, and get out of that, or to speak out. But there's something about what you're doing in terms of introducing them to the God of the universe that makes a difference and creates that lasting healing.
Yeah. I'll answer. I can't find any other transformational power. So I think it's just basically like, if I had another transformational power, I would offer that too, but that's really the power. You need a power greater than yourself. I mean, every addict will tell you this. Everyone stuck in patterns of oppression will tell you in the end, whether or not you fully even understand, and so there's so much sort of religious abuse and sexual abuse that happens in religious households that sometimes you have to disentangle. So even a Brave event that a church holds, we call it a pre-evangelism event, not an evangelism event. So this event is not just about the church re-exploiting vulnerable girls to say, now you have to belong to this church, or now you have to follow Jesus, or else you can't be free. What this is to say, we see you, you matter, and we believe in you. And we're with you. You're not alone anymore. And then that becomes a catalyst, an empowerment catalyst, that now they know they're wanted. Now they know they're seen. Now they know they're not invisible. And now they have the power, potentially the capacity, to choose faith, or to choose God, or to choose the church, or to choose a community, or not to. I mean, this is one of the beautiful things of the transforming message of Jesus is, he's given us life or death. And he says, I really pray you choose life. So empowerment is about giving people choices back. And disempowerment, of course, is the inability to choose. So anytime you take choice away from somebody, you're participating in disempowerment. So I think that's kind of now what happens is Brave is not an evangelism event. It's a pre-evangelism event. But literally, when we get a survivor to come tell their story, and you can read this in the book, Brave in Real Life, they all involve God. Like, that's the power of testimony, right? So this isn't an agenda, but good luck finding a survivor that's actually thriving, that doesn't have a faith relationship with God in their life. I mean, I can't find any. If I could find them, they'd be there, but they're not, because God is so central to actual transformation.
And a huge piece of that is the power of forgiveness. These women have been so horrendously abused, hurt, wounded, unless and until they can find a way to forgive their perpetrators, they'll continue to suffer as victims.
Yeah.
It's only through forgiveness that they realize they can differentiate the fact that they have been victimized, but that they are not victims. And there's a huge difference there. And they can't come to that until and unless they know themselves that they have been forgiven. And that's where Jesus comes in.
Awesome.
So
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I say on this podcast, and we talk about leaders of transformation, and truly, I believe that the true transformation is a spiritual transformation that happens. That's where healing happens at the deepest levels, and everything else follows from that. But I know that there's people that kind of go like, why is it always these ministries that are trying to, they're trying to, they have an agenda, and it's no agenda. And that's why I didn't preface that question or prepare you for that question, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And so people who are listening realize that it's a necessary part of it, but it's an optional, it's a choice. So I love how you said that it's a choice, it's an option. But there, and you also said, and what I wanted to highlight there is you said there's not a testimony out there. You won't find a girl that is truly transformed and healed that doesn't have that freedom for forgiveness, being forgiven and forgiving others and being free in that. So that's where true freedom comes. So thank you for that. Danielle, last final thoughts and resources. Where can you mentioned a few earlier. You've got your website, braveglobal.org. And in Canada, it's braveglobal.ca. Of course, the book, we've been promoting the book, Brave in Real Life, Stories from Women Who Have Overcome Sexual Exploitation is the name of it. Is there any other resources that you recommend that if somebody's listening out there on either side, like you said, maybe there's some guys out there listening, or some girls?
Yeah, I mean, those websites are great places to begin. Even if you have an interest in supporting, you could donate to the cause. That would be wonderful so that we can keep producing resources for girls and see girls empowered. We're dreaming about a resource for boys as well so that we can get them before they become perpetrators. So that's still in our dream. That's in our dreams to do. But we don't have the resources yet. So if that's something that you really believe in and love dearly, we'd love for that to happen. And then if you want to be a brave community, which is what we would love the most, because we really love to mobilize the church. It's one thing to say that the church is the hope of the world or Christians are bringing light and salt. It's a whole other thing to actually be it. So we would love to actually move from the theory of it to the practice of it. And we think Brave is a part of that strategy. So if that's something, you can actually literally just register there and ask for help, and a coach will be in touch with you and walk you through the process. And you might be able to begin that in your own community. That would be our dream goal. And there's a Brave Leadership Academy. So if you know of a girl that wants to go on a longer 6-month mentorship journey, we've kicked off Leadership Academy. And there's a Brave Girls podcast. It's just called Brave Girls Podcast. If you want to learn more from two girls that host Brave Girls Podcast, you can. There's loads of beautiful things that are emerging as God leads us. But I think his desire is to mobilize people to set people free. I mean, I think that's a manifesto of Jesus himself. So it's time. So we really hope to motivate you, to inspire you, and starting even just with this book, Brave in Real Life, let the women speak for themselves. And you'll hear a call in there to action.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Guy. I appreciate. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I wrote the book. It's still my hope to get those stories into a girl's hands before a perpetrator gets his hands on her. Because she will be resourced. Every single person is looking for love. The sad and tragic piece is these perpetrators so very often begin as loving, caring men, the Romeo boyfriend. But by then it's too late. If a girl gives a guy compromised photographs on her iPhone, it's called iPhone blackmail. And all he has to do is say, if you don't perform sexual favors to my buddies, mommy and daddy are going to see what their little girl looks like now. You don't want that, do you? Brave in Real Life can help a girl say, nope, not going there, chump. See you later.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, both of you, thank you so much for all you do. And I know that there is a lot of people behind you, especially Danielle. There's a lot of people behind you that are part of this organization that make it happen. And so we just thank you all for what it is that you're doing. It's awesome. So inspiring. And thank you for being here and sharing a little bit of it. And we know that whoever's listening, I know that this is near and dear to my heart. It always has been. because I hate to see people hurting, and the brokenhearted. I have a heart for the brokenhearted, if you will, and to see that transformation, to see people as who God created them to be, is really my passion. So thank you for that. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We appreciate you being here. And I would encourage you to go to leadersatransformation.com. We have all this, of course, this episode. You can share it if there's somebody that you know that or you suspect that might be dealing with something, and maybe they can't express it, or they don't know how to talk about it with you, or you don't know exactly what's going on. Share this with them. And if you have a church community and you want to have Brave come in and do a Brave event, then share it with them. If get a copy of the book. And so all these resources and the links that we've talked about here are all going to be in the show notes on the leadersatransformation.com. Also, as I mentioned, Harmony's episode, the interview that we did a couple of years back, will also be there as well. We'll make sure it's linked at the bottom of the show notes for this episode as well, so you can link back to that. And man, this is like episode 405. We have 404 other amazing guests that have been on this show. And so I encourage you to go check those out. And if there's a topic that you're interested in, you can type it in the search field and it will come up. If we've done an episode on that. Actually, Sarah Simons, she has an organization called Her Future Coalition. She works with girls internationally and helps them to find employment after they've come out of being in an abusive or exploited situation where they've been trafficked. She helps them. So that's also on the website as well. So some really great resources there. So we encourage you to do that. Again, thank you. Tune in next week because we have another amazing guest. Next Tuesday, you can join us live, or you can watch or listen to the replay that will, of course, be available as well. So again, thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.